Question 23 says that 8% of 60 is 1/5 of what number? And as answer choices, we have numbers ranging from 0.96 all the way to 3,750. And answer choice C is the double of B. And also answer choice D is 10 times answer choice C. As far as the ACT math concepts in the question, we obviously are dealing with percents. And the other thing that stands out to me here in reading the question is that a lot of these words used in the question can be translated into mathematical symbols. So we could also create an equation algebraically with the words in this question. And that leads to the different approaches that we can take here, which I'll write out at the very top. So approaches, and the first one we can take is a more concrete way, which is to test out answers. And the second is this more formal way of basically creating an algebraic equation and solving for x. Both of these approaches can be very efficient, and they're both great ways of approaching the question. I'm going to, as always, start with the concrete way first, just to reinforce our awareness that we can use that approach on this test. So before we do that, let's actually go back to what the question was asking, which is 8% of 60 is 1/5 of what number? Well, to start out here, we can just figure out what 8% of 60 is. And to do that, we want to convert this percent into a decimal. So 8% is the same thing as 0.08. And then the word of means to multiply. So 0.08 times 60. Let's pull up the calculator and figure out what that is. So 0.08 times 60, that gives us 4.8. So this whole expression here, I'll just box that in and put 4.8. So essentially, the question is saying 4.8 is 1/5 of what number? In this testing answers approach, we'll just assume that one of the answers is correct and plug it back in and see if it checks out. I generally like to start with the middle answer and adjust accordingly from there. So let's start out with 24. 4.8 is 1/5 of what number? Well, if 24 is correct, let's try that out. 1/5 of 24. We can again do that on our calculator. 1/5 in parentheses times 24, and we get 4.8. So that actually works out exactly as we wanted. So C is the correct answer there. All right, and now let's do it this more formal way, which is to create an algebraic equation and then solve for x. The way that we could do that, as I mentioned in the very beginning, is we can begin to translate all of this into an equation. So 8% that we saw we can write as 0.08, and then the word of is multiply, so 8% of 60, as we had written before, and then is just means equals, and then 1/5, we write that down. We have the word of, so multiply, and then we have this what number thing, which is indicating an unknown, so we can just write a variable there, like x, and this is our equation, and we essentially want to figure out what that x value is, so we want to isolate that x. Well, we already figured out that 0.08 times 60 is 4.8, so we can write 4.8 equals 1/5 times x, and then the last step here to get x by itself, we're going to multiply by 5 on both sides to get rid of this 1/5. So I'll multiply by 5 here, multiply by 5 here, and we'll get that x is equal to 5 times 4.8. 5 times 4.8, and that equals 24, just like we got earlier. So C is again correct. And by the way, there is one other way of approaching this question, which we could use initially to solve it completely, or which we could also use quickly now to double check ourselves. And that's to kind of do some mental math and just ballpark the answer. And we can do that because these answer choices are so far spread apart. So for example, we see that they're asking for 8% of 60. But if we want to do some mental math, we could just kind of see that this is really close to 10%. And we could think, okay, 10% of 60. Well, 10% of 60 is just going to be 6. 6 is 1/5 of what number? Well, 6 times 5 is 30. So 6 is 1/5 of 30. So our answer is going to be around 30. And in fact, it's going to be a little bit less because we're not actually finding 6. We're finding a number that's slightly less than 6. And the only answer choice that's around 30 and also less than 30 is C. So that would be a really quick way to mentally check that our answer is reasonable. And as I said earlier, we could even have solved it like that in the first place. Let's take a look now at a few of these wrong answers. And these wrong answers mainly reflect mistakes in solving it the formal way. For example, answer choice A of 0.96 could reflect getting the initial equation set up correctly. So we had 0.08 times 60 is equal to 1 over 5 times x. But then instead of multiplying by 5 on both sides, if we had divided by 5 on both sides, that would lead to 0.96. As far as answer choice B of 12, I'm not sure what that was anticipating, but answer choice D of 240 could reflect another easy to make mistake of when writing out the initial equation, instead of doing 0.08, doing 0.8, because if we did 0.8 times 60 equals 1/5 of x, and then we had gone on to solve that, that would give us 240. And finally, answer choice E of 3,750. One way to get that would be to do 60 divided by 0.08 as well as 1 over 5. So this is essentially using all the right numbers from the question, but just doing the wrong operations on those numbers. And I'm going to write out what we ultimately needed to know down here because we're sort of running out of space. Ultimately we needed to know basic percents to convert that percent into a decimal. We also had to do arithmetic. And then in doing it the formal way, we sort of needed to know how to translate the English into algebra. So for the formal approach, translating English to algebra. And that wraps things up for question 23. Let's go on to 24.